There are men who fight for glory, and there are men who fight for Rome. But once, long ago, there rose a commander who fought for something greater than both. He fought for the idea that Rome was not a city, but a destiny. When he gazed upon the horizon, he didn't see the edge of empire. He saw unfinished lines waiting to be drawn by his sword. From the burning sands of Africa to the frozen winds of the north, his name became a storm. Spoken in fear, whispered in reverence, he was not merely a conqueror. He was the hand of expansion, the architect of Rome's greatest reach. Under his command, the empire stretched its wings wider than ever before, until even the gods must have looked down and wondered, how far will Rome go? There comes a moment in every empire's story when fate looks down and chooses one man to carry the weight of destiny. Rome, mighty, restless, eternal, had conquered much, but she was still hungry. Her legions had marched across continents, yet her spirit demanded more. And in that hunger, in that yearning to push the boundaries of civilization itself, she found him. He was not born in marble halls or beneath silken banners. He came from dust, from the sound of clashing steel and the scent of sweat-soaked armor. His first victories were not carved on monuments, but earned in the mud, in the chaos of battles where the line between courage and madness was razor thin. He learned early that the empire rewards not those who speak, but those who endure. The boy who once carried a soldier's shield became the man before whom kings trembled. They said his gaze could steady an army and break an enemy. He did not command with words. He commanded with presence. To his men, he was none. He was not merely a general. He was Rome itself made flesh. Every step he took through the camps echoed with the rhythm of destiny. The crackle of the fire at night, the murmurs of soldiers dreaming of home. These were his companions. He did not rest beneath gold, but beneath the same stars as his legionaries. For he knew that greatness does not descend from privilege. It is forged in the fire of trial, hammered by defeat, and polished by persistence. In his youth, he studied maps, but not as others did. To him, a map was not a boundary, it was a challenge. Each unclaimed territory whispered to him like a siren, daring him to cross deserts no Roman had crossed, to march into storms no banner had flown through. He would trace his finger along the edges of parchment and murmur to himself, Rome will breathe here, and here, and here, and here. The Senate doubted him, the generals envied him, yet the legions followed him not out of duty, but out of belief, because in his presence, men felt the pulse of something immortal. He could stand before 10,000 weary soldiers and remind them of who they were, the sons of the wolf, heirs of an empire destined to rule all lands beneath the sun. And so he rose, not as a man chasing power, but as one chosen by the very spirit of Rome. Battle after battle, victory after victory, he carved his name not just into history, but into the bones of continents. The wind carried tales of his triumphs across mountains and seas. To the east they spoke of his cunning, to the west of his thunder. Yet behind every triumph was struggle unseen, the weight of command, the price of vision. He had stared into the eyes of death and found only resolve staring back. Every scar upon his armor told a story, not of conquest, but of sacrifice. And as his fame grew, so did the legend. Mothers would hush their children at night, whispering his name not with fear, but with awe. For in an age of chaos, he was order. In an age of ambition, he was destiny made flesh. Rome had found many heroes before him, but in him, Rome found its expansion, its reach beyond imagination. For where others saw the edge of the world, he saw only the beginning. And so began the march that would stretch the empire to its greatest borders, led by a man whose sword wrote history not in ink, but in the blood and glory of empire. He had seen the empire's heart, the marble towers of Rome, the golden light that kissed the Tiber. But his vision stretched beyond all that. To him, the empire was not confined to the 7 hills. It was an idea too vast to be held by walls, too fierce to be defined by borders. He would often stand before his map, a sea of parchment and ink, and trace his hand across the lands yet untouched by Roman order. His eyes, deep and calculating, did not see enemies. He saw possibilities. He saw roads yet unbuilt, cities yet unborn, nations yet to be brought into the great harmony of Roman law and strength. His vision was not of mere conquest. It was of unification. Of a world bound by discipline, law, and the unrelenting march of progress. While others craved triumphs to adorn their names, he craved legacy, a Rome so immense that the setting sun would never find her borders. He believed the empire was more than soldiers and steel. It was a light, one that could burn away the darkness of chaos. So, he became its torchbearer. When his legions marched, they carried not just spears and shields, but the promise of order. Wherever they planted the eagle, trade would follow, knowledge would bloom, and the ancient world would awaken. Yet vision has its price. Every dream of greatness demands sacrifice. He knew that each step forward meant blood, that for every banner raised, a father would fall. But still, he pressed on, because he believed that the future demanded it. To him, history did not belong to the cautious. It belonged to those who dared to shape it. In the stillness of night, when campfires flickered low and the wind whispered through the tents, he would speak softly to his closest men. Rome is not finished, he'd say. She grows each time we march. She lives as long as we believe she can. They followed him because he gave them something greater than gold, purpose. He made them see beyond the next battle, beyond their own mortality. He gave them the illusion. No, the faith that they were building eternity. And as his legions swept eastward and westward, the known world began to shift. Kingdoms that had once defied the eagle now bent their knees. Roads stretched like veins across continents, carrying the lifeblood of an empire whose heart beat stronger with every conquest. He was no longer just a commander. He had become a vision incarnate. A man whose dreams redefined geography, whose will bent landscapes, whose footsteps left echoes in history. But vision, no matter how grand, ever free from doubt. In the marble chambers of the Senate, men whispered that he reached too far, that his ambitions burned too bright. They could not see what he saw, that every empire dies the moment it stops reaching. And so, he pressed onward, not for applause, not for the laurels of politics, but because he understood the truth that few dared to speak. If Rome's heart stopped expanding, it would begin to die. And so with unshakable will, he led his men beyond the horizon, into lands uncharted, against odds unmeasured, guided not by greed, but by a vision that would make the world remember his name long after the marble of his statues had crumbled to dust. There is a silence that comes before battle, a stillness so pure it feels as though even the gods hold their breath. He knew that silence well, that haunting calm that trembled before chaos. For years now, his vision had stretched beyond Rome's walls, but visions mean little without blood to anchor them. And so he marched, through deserts where the sun burned like judgment, through forests where mist cloaked every shadow, through rivers that swallowed men whole. Everywhere his legions went, the earth remembered them. They called him the Iron Shadow, for where his banner appeared, the sun often set on freedom. Yet even his enemies, those who cursed his name, could not deny the magnitude of his will. When he stood before the legions, the air itself seemed to hold weight. His voice, steady, calm, certain, carried across thousands. Rome does not retreat, he would say. Rome does not rest, and they believed him. Because they had seen him in the thick of the storm, sword drawn, eyes unwavering, his crimson cloak torn by wind and ash. He was not a general who commanded from safety. He was there in the fire, side by side with his men, as the world around them burned. The deserts of the east were cruel, sandstorms that blinded, thirst that punished even the strong. But his resolve outlasted the sun. The cold of Germania bit like steel, but he did not flinch. His army was his reflection, relentless, unyielding, unstoppable. Every victory carved deeper into history, but every victory also took something from him. The weight of command pressed upon his shoulders like the weight of a mountain. Each dawn brought new land, and each night new ghosts. He had seen too much. Comrades who laughed around fires one evening and were gone by morning. Men who bled out in silence, clutching the earth they died to claim. Yet he never faltered. To show weakness, even for a breath, would unravel the faith that held the empire together. Battle after battle, the map changed. Provinces that had never spoken Latin now echoed with Roman voices. Fortresses fell, cities burned, and the red banner of the eagle was raised higher, brighter, further than ever before. But behind the glory lay a truth he could not escape. That empire is built not on victory, but on loss. For every city Rome gained, 100 hearts were broken. For every triumphal march, 1,000 widows wept. He knew this, he felt it. And still he marched, because Rome's destiny demanded it. As his legions pushed the frontiers to the farthest reaches of the known world, his legend became a living flame. He had turned the wilderness into the empire's frontier, the impossible into Rome's reality. Yet deep within, he began to understand the cost of endless conquest. The blood that fed the empire's rise was also its curse, a fire that, once lit, could never truly be extinguished. Still, he pressed forward, because to stop, even for a moment, would mean admitting that the dream had limits, and Rome, under his hand, had none. The drums fade, replaced by the lonely sound of wind across a battlefield littered with forgotten banners. History would remember the expansion, the borders drawing in triumph. But only he knew the truth, that those borders were written in blood and fire and in the quiet tears of the men who carried Rome's destiny on their shoulders. Greatness, it is a word men speak with pride, but few understand its cost. He had won it all, the lands, the titles, the eternal whispers of history. Yet behind every triumph lay a price unseen. The banners still waved, but the laughter of comrades was gone. The empire stretched to its mightiest borders, yet he felt smaller with every passing victory. They called him Rome's Greatest Conqueror, but in the silence of his tent, with a torchlight flickering against his armor, he often wondered what it had cost him to become that. His hands, once steady with purpose, now trembled when they were still. The same sword that carved an empire had also carved away his peace. For every city taken, a part of his soul remained behind, buried beneath the ashes and bones of conquest. He remembered their faces, the men who had followed him into storms and deserts, the ones who had believed in his vision, even when hope itself had fled. He remembered the way they fell, not as soldiers, but as brothers, and when he closed his eyes, he could still hear them. Their laughter, their screams, their silence. The Senate praised him as a god of war. The people cheered his name as if he were immortal, yet he knew better. He knew that gods do not bleed. He did, and every scar upon his flesh told a story not of victory, but of sacrifice. Nights became his enemy. When the battles ended and the world grew quiet, memory came marching back. He could still see the cities burning, hear the cries of the conquered, feel the weight of 1,000 choices he could never undo. He had expanded Rome to her greatest borders, but he had also expanded the reach of his own guilt. For he understood now that empires are not only built on stone and steel, they are built on bones. Still, he did not regret the path, because somewhere deep inside he knew Rome demanded it. The empire's greatness was not born from mercy, but from endurance, and he had endured more than any man should. Yet even the strongest walls crumbled. He began to feel the cracks within himself, the slow erosion of purpose, the quiet question that every conqueror faces when the fighting stops. What remains when there are no more worlds to take? He would walk through his encampment at night, past the rows of sleeping soldiers, men who still dreamed of glory of home. And as he watched them, he realized that perhaps greatness was never meant for peace. Perhaps it only lives in struggle and dies when the war ends. He had given Rome everything, his youth, his blood, his humanity, and in return she had given him eternity. But eternity, he learned, is a lonely place. A pause. The wind sighs through the remains of a battlefield. A single torch flickers out. The price of greatness was not gold, nor crowns, nor marble statues. It was silence, the kind that follows after the cheers fade when even victory feels like loss. And so he stood at the edge of his empire, at the very borders he had carved with his own hands. And for the first time he did not see conquest. He saw ghosts, a breath, softly, almost as if confessing to time itself. To build an empire is to destroy yourself piece by piece, until only the legend remains. Ymir has a way of softening all things, the noise of war, the cries of the fallen, even the echo of greatness. But some names, some deeds, they do not fade. They become part of the soil, the air, the very pulse of history. He was gone now, the man who had once commanded empires, who had stretched Rome's shadow across continents. Yet the world he left behind still bore his mark. Roads that cut through mountains, cities that rose from ashes, borders that defined the known world, all of them whispered his legacy. Rome had seen many conquerors before him, but none who dared so much or paid so dearly. His name was carved into the marble of temples, sung by poets, cursed by kings. And though centuries would pass, his legend would not remain a tale of conquest alone. It became a study in what it means to bear the burden of destiny. They say the empire reached its greatest expanse under his hand, from the sands of Arabia to the misted cliffs of Britannia, from the roaring Danube to the silent deserts beyond the Nile. But those borders were not just lines on a map. They were the boundaries of human ambition, the outer edge of what one man could dream and then make real. Yet even in death, his story refused to rest. For every stone monument that bore his likeness, there stood 1,000 nameless graves that bore his cost. His legacy was written not only in triumph but in sacrifice, in the blood of soldiers who believed in his vision and in the tears of those who mourned them. He had once said that Rome was not a city, it was an idea, and ideas do not die. Long after his sword had rusted, long after his body had turned to dust, that idea endured. The laws he spread, the roads he built, the order he imposed, they became the spine of civilization. The world itself would measure its history in 2 eras, before Rome and after. But perhaps his greatest legacy was not the land he conquered, nor the empires he humbled. It was the lesson he left behind. That power, no matter how vast, is fleeting, that even the mightiest of empires can crumble, but purpose endures. Generations later, when travelers walked the remnants of his roads, they would feel something, a presence, a whisper in the wind. And in that whisper, the old words seemed to return. Rome does not retreat. Rome does not rest. And though the marble statues fell, though time reclaimed the glory of empire, the spirit of that one man, the conqueror who saw no boundaries, still lived in every dreamer who dared to push further, in every leader who believed that destiny belongs to those who reach beyond their horizon. Soft orchestral swell, the sound of dawn breaking over ancient ruins. The empire he built may have faded, but his name became eternal. Not because he conquered the world, but because he expanded what mankind believed was possible. And in the grand silence of time, when empires turn to dust and kings to stories, his voice still lingers, carried by the wind over forgotten battlefields, whispering to those who would listen, the world belongs to the relentless. The music rises, horns of triumph fading into the distance as the curtain of history falls.